I'm Mort, your host on Change Your Voice, Change Your Life. In studio with me is Dr. John Curtis, my co-host, and the topic today is a fascinating one, as usual. And the topic?
This is Coverup at the New York Times. And
Coverup at the New York Times.
That's
an unusual concept, to cover up, because the New York Times is one of the crusading newspapers and the gold standard.
It's the most prestigious print publication in the country.
Right.
And they print, the New York Times, all the news that's fit to print.
Well, that can be interpreted two different ways. They print all the news they feel is fit to print.
Well, and the news they do feel that is fit to print is something that they believe is factual and real information, but the news that they edit out, they believe, is spurious.
One of the fascinating areas of the New York Times, which I am a subscriber to and have been for years, is their editorial page is very, very telling. It's based on ethic and morality, and it is scathing about, at times, about the injustices, corruption, misdemeanors, and whatever else goes on in society. Yet I find, if I may say so, folks, that there are certain areas the New York Times is very remiss about.
Do you mean, are you pointing to a blind spot?
Yes, a blind spot.
In other words, the very opinions and fingers that they're pointing at other individuals, corporations,
and the world,
and the world at large, and the government, and officials, and people that are engaged in malfeasant actions. You're saying something very interesting, which is that they are the pot calling the kettle black, that they're engaging in similar behavior on their front page as they're accusing other people on their editorial page.
Yes.
That's a very interesting concept. Now, what evidence or proof do you have of this?
Well, I've been in correspondence with the New York Times, folks, from the top on down for over 10 years. From the Sulzbergers who own the New York Times, who run the New York Times, their editors, their writers, and others, on an issue that's very appropriate and meaningful to you. And that's namely your voice, your speaking voice. The New York Times has two ways to judge what they print on the speaking voice. Two ways. One is the medical approach that they seem to honor in great degree. If you read the Science Times, you will see that they have medical doctors that write their columns, basically. I say basically, maybe now and then they have somebody.
Is Jane E. Brody a physician?
No, Jane E. Brody is one of the top health writers.
She's a health and science writer, right?
That's right.
But she's not a physician, is she?
No, she's featured there each week in a column. And Jane E. Brody believes in the medical community wholeheartedly.
She had never questioned some of the treatments that they suggest. I know that a number of years ago, Jane E. Brody published a piece on spasmodic dysphonia.
Right.
And
in 1992.
And I think that she said that the medical profession really has the answer to spasmodic dysphonia.
That's correct.
Do they have the answer to spasmodic dysphonia?
Well, that's the problem. Jane E. Brody takes the handouts of the medical community. And in the column she wrote, she indicated that there were two approaches to a condition called the strangled voice spasmodic dysphonia. It sounds like this. I can't. It's a strangled, strained voice with the vocal cords going into spasm. The medical field has said, since Straub first described the condition in 1871, they have no cures, and it was called nervous hoarseness at that time. Today it's called spasmodic dysphonia or spastic dysphonia. Brody allowed two sources to influence her in that column. One was a major source, and that was Dr. Mitchell Bryn, who is a neurologist. And Dr. Bryn brought Botox, which is the treatment of choice in the medical community today, and has been the treatment of choice in ear, nose, and throat treatment of spasmodic dysphonia and in the medical world, to spasmodic dysphonia. And he said in that column, and Brody used that information, that there are no cures of spasmodic dysphonia, and that spasmodic dysphonia is to be treated by either Botox or by surgery.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the surgery that Jane E. Brody wrote about was Herb Dito surgery up in San Francisco, which began in the early 70s. And in 1994, after a period of 20 years, that surgery was found to be 2/3 worse off after the surgery than before. And that was stated in the American Speech and Hearing Association, the #1 field of communication in treating voice disorders. Brody allowed that statement to run in 1992. And the New York Times has never corrected that information, that the surgery she recommended leaves 2/3 of those worse off after the surgery than before. So there's only one operative treatment, and that is Botox, which is Bo for botulism and tox for toxin. It's the world's deadliest poison, and it's used in therapeutic doses, which means it's diluted. But it's the world's deadliest poison.
And is that deadly poison that's used in therapeutic doses, in your view, effective for treating this condition you call the strangled voice?
Not from my information, but from the medical point of view, it is the cat's meow and a godsend.
Well, that was actually the statement, I think the quote from Robert McAllister, Dr. Robert McAllister, who is the executive director of the National Spasmodic Dysphonia Association. Now, you have
this association, Dr.
You have
Curtis,
some information about that association.
This association, folks, gets generous donations of money from Allergan, the maker of Botox. I'm not saying that. It's on the website of Allergan, the maker of Botox, and on the NSDA, which is National Spasmodic Dysphonic Association, which is a 501c nonprofit group. So this association...
Well, this isn't just a claim that you're making about them receiving money.
No, it's not.
This is actually from their website.
Yeah, they're very proud of it.
So they've really openly disclosed this.
Yes.
But I find that curious because when I tried to reach Dr. McAllister, who subsequently I was told is no longer with the association, and they will not give me a forwarding number where I can reach him.
He has been terminated.
He's been evaporated. He's been liquidated. He no longer works for the organization. So I contacted the new executive director, and she told me, I asked her, can you please get me an accounting, a very simple accounting of how much money you've been paid over the last 5 years by the drug maker Allergan, the maker of Botox. And I've yet to hear back from her on what that accounting is. Now, you're saying that it's on the website that they receive generous donations from the drug maker.
It's on Allergan's website. It's on the National Spasmodic Dysphonic
So why would she be
Association
reluctant
website.
to furnish me with details over how much money they've received?
I don't know, but mystery is mystery and intrigue is intrigue, and I just wonder what's going on. But I want to point out one other aspect of Jane E. Brody's column. The New York Times is reputed to be the gold standard in journalism. Jane E. Brody referred those with spasmodic dysphonia, the strangled voice, to the National Spasmodic Dysphonic Association for additional information. This is the same organization that's getting money from Allergan, the maker of Botox. The NSDA is a nonprofit 501c, and it's given generous donations by a for-profit corporation, Allergan. There seems to be some problem in my mind in understanding why Jane E. Brody of the New York Times would refer only or essentially to the National Spasmodic Dysphonic Association that has given generous donations of money by Allergan. And so Jane E. Brody is pushing Botox. She's actually pushing Botox.
But she's not paid directly, in your view, by Allergan, Inc., the
no,
maker
not at
of
all.
Botox.
She's taking a handout from the medical community through Dr. Mitchell Bryn, who is a well-known neurologist who had brought Botox to the field. I see nothing wrong with her writing the column.
I thought Dr. Mitchell Bryn is actually a vice president of marketing for Allergan.
No, he's a vice president of Allergan. I don't know about marketing today.
But that is what, in fact, he does, is he goes around the country, and he also is a point man, you believe, at the New York Times for supplying information about Botox. And issues connected with the spasmodic dysphonia, the strangled voice.
Well, let's update the story because Jane E. Brody and I had communication, and Nick Wade, who is the Science Times editor, and I had written communication, and Corey Dean, who is the editor now of that section, and I had correspondence over a period of time, and the Sulzbergers, senior and junior, and I had correspondence, and Lawrence Altman, an MD, whose name sometimes is only Lawrence Altman and other times Lawrence Altman MD, depends on when they want to make the point, have had correspondence. And Nick Wade said in writing, when they get around to it, because of my concern about spasmodic dysphonia being incurable, according to the Jane E. Brody statement, which I sent her material saying, that is not so, that's nonsense. I've been reporting cures of spasmodic dysphonia for years and sent her the information. Brody declined to accept that information and ignored it, and so did the editors of the New York Times. But the point I'm getting to now...
That sounds like they're covering up cures.
Yes.
To the extent that there are cures that exist, you've been disseminating and reporting the cures. They, at the New York Times, will not extend the same courtesy that they do to what appears like the National Spasmodic Dysphonia Association that seems to support the use of Botox. Why is it okay for them to support the use of Botox, but it's not okay for them to share information to the public about a non-medical, non-invasive, and non-toxic cure that you've had for many years of this condition called the strangled voice?
Well, you put your hand on the story, which we began with. Mine is non-medical. The New York Times writers, such as Brody, accepts handouts by the medical people. That's how she's writing a column week after week after week after week. And what's interesting about it is a non-medical cure is not acceptable to the National Spasmodic Dysphonic Association. It gets generous donations of money from Allegan, and they write in their newsletter, they're looking to unmask the neurological cause of strangled voice spasmodic dysphonia. My correspondence with the NSDA is very simple, National Spasmodic Dysphonic Association. The strangled voice is not a medical problem. It's not a neurological problem. It's not a disease. It's a bad use of the voice. And that's why I can report ongoing cures of spasmodic dysphonia.
That's like diametrically opposed view from, the medical field, the medical profession, the pharmaceutical companies. They all seem to think that spasmodic dysphonia, or the strangled voice, is really due to a neurological problem.
Yes.
Now, why do you have a differing point of view?
Because I have the proof and the experience clinically to verify and to be very strong-minded. And it takes a lot of courage to go up against the medical community, to go up against the drug industry, Allegan, to go up against my field, the American Speech and Hearing Association, which in 1994 allowed this association, my field, to have its website say, and it still prevails, that there are no cures of spasmodic dysphonia. And do you know who was responsible for that statement through the American Speech and Hearing Association?
Who did you find?
The National Spasmodic Dysphonic Association was influential, the sole source of information that was responsible for making the statement in ASHA, the American Speech and Hearing Association,
that there are no cures of spasmodic dysphonia?
That there are no cures of spasmodic dysphonia, and that spasmodic dysphonia should be treated by Botox.
And Botox is the treatment of choice for that condition.
In the medical community.
That's their view in the medical field.
So you put your finger on it before.
But
there's no medical cure.
But don't you think there's an inconsistency here on the part of the New York Times? Because if they're really disseminating a balanced, all the news that's really fit to print, the news that's fit to print is a cure that would not involve invasive medical procedures, but rather would help somebody to improve their voice without resorting to something toxic or something invasive like a surgery. There were more recent articles than the one you've talked about with Jane E. Brody.
I know we're going to bring it up to snuff, up to the
written
current.
by I think his name is Douglas. Is that McNeil Jr.?
No, Douglas G. McNeil Jr.
Douglas McNeil Jr., right? Okay. Now,
Douglas G.
he's
Jr.
flat out come out in that article. And
March 2nd, 2003.
This
the
is a
front
couple years
page
ago.
of the New York Times.
He said that
Sunday edition, the most prestigious Sunday edition.
They shared in that article, that front page edition, that Botox gives patients with spastic vocal cords back their voices.
Right.
Is that an accurate statement?
No. It's not documented. I got in touch with...
Where did McNeil get this statement
I
from?
asked him that, and he faxed me the answer. In a 2002 study, he sent a paragraph which had no relevance to what the story said.
You
No
mean
relevance.
Nothing about Botox giving patients with spastic vocal cords back their voices.
No, it was-
Why would he
it was
send you
irrelevant.
that resource then? Why
Well,
didn't he send you specifically the resource on the statement? You were very specific and clear with him that you wanted to know who you could attribute the statement that Botox is giving patients with spastic vocal cords back their voices.
Right.
Now, you seem to have some speculation that one of the sources of information for some of these articles, these medically related articles in your field to the New York Times, has to do with this fellow by the name of Mitchell Brin.
Could be.
But you don't know that,
No,
right?
no.
But where would McNeil, who is a layperson and a journalist, who knows almost nothing about spasmodic dysphonia other than the information he receives, who could possibly give him information like that?
Mitchell Brin and others like Mitchell Brin.
Okay. Who else besides, do you think, Andrew Blitzer?
Andrew Blitzer.
He could have supplied him that information?
No, Blitzer is one of the top people who
What about
believes that
Peek Woo?
SD is a neurological problem. Peek Woo is another. The medical profession believes wholeheartedly that spasmodic dysphonia is a neurological problem. They treat it with Botox 4 to 10 times a year or more each and every year for life. It may be $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a Botox shot. It's a full employment
Kind of
act for the
expensive
medical.
for Botox, isn't it?
What's that?
Isn't $3,000 awfully high? I mean, I've been seeing it advertised in the LA
yes.
Times.
We had a young lady here.
I think $100 a shot.
Well, that's Botox for the face. We're talking about they made it a mystique.
Is there a difference in the Botox they receive? Is it like platinum lined or gold, or is it some special type of Botox they use for the vocal cords?
Well, Dr. Curtis, what is it called? What
the traffic will bear?
Isn't that it?
But that's like gouging. That's not something that
You
medical.
call it
that's
what
not
you want,
something
but I'm
physicians
just
would do.
speculating on that. We had a young lady here by the name of Nancy who had, I believe it was 9 Botox shots, $3,000 a shot every 3 or 4 months, and she had this for 2.5 years approximately. She never got one positive result, and her ear, nose, and throat doctor suggested that she increased the number of shots so she can have them once a month. But Nancy, and she was on this program, said, "But doctor, I've never had one positive result." So she discontinued because her personal physician told her not to continue.
Don't you find that odd that this woman would have not one positive result from Botox when the drug maker claims that Botox is 99% effective?
Well, the statement that is made, that 99%, whether it's made by Allergan, I'm not sure Allergan says that specifically, but physicians do say it in treating the patients. I have seen a patient, and she is not an anomaly, had 40 Botox shots from the Mayo Clinic and never got one positive result, not one.
0 out of 40.
That's over 8 years. Not one.
That's 0% efficacy.
Yeah. We had Tom Donovan, who is the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. He had 17 Botox shots. The only one that took is the first one, and he had the top-of-the-line doctors Brin and Bastian in Chicago. They're excellent doctors. The problem is not the physician, I'm saying. I believe the problem is with the product because it's an unpredictable outcome. And Tom had 16 additional shots, and they never worked. That's 17 shots over a period of 4 years. I do not find these patients to be anomaly. I do not find them to be irregular.
I thought Donovan said that he had one of those shots really helped him.
The first one.
And that was given by Andrew Blitzer, right?
No, I think that was given by Brin.
Mitchell Brin?
Yeah, I think so.
So Dr. Brin, in other words, if you're really skillful at these shots, they can be effective then.
No, the point is it's unpredictable. These shots are repeated, but the outcomes are unpredictable.
Is the dosage in the shots is that a very scientifically determined amount?
Well, the National Spasmodic Dysphonic video says the dosage is precise. Pete Wu in New York, who's one of the top ear, nose, and throat doctors, disputes that. He is experimental in the dosage. The point is that
what about the placement of the needle?
That's also
is that
in
also
dispute.
Scientific?
The NSDA, National Spasmodic Dysphonic Association, says
Michael
it is.
Rolnick says
But
it is.
yes, I understand that. But the patients are telling me other than that. Now, how am I able to say that Botox is unpredictable, that its dosage is experimental, and incidentally, the treatment of SD is experimental. It is not approved directly by the FDA. It is approved because Botox is approved for eye spasms and for neck spasms, but it's used then for vocal cord spasms because once you approve the product for one substance or one use, you can approve it for all, but it's not direct approval, and therefore the physicians do not have to report serious side effects because it's not directly approved.
But doesn't that sound like
that
the drug maker, I mean, just in this particular instance, is engaging in a Procrustean exercise, that they say that one size fits all. But how do you apply, if something works for a minor muscle in the eye, you're talking about minuscule little muscles, or in the neck, why would they think that it would work necessarily to improve voices?
Because Mitchell Bryn is of the view, since he's a neurologist, that this is a neuromuscular, that this is a neurological problem, and that's where he makes the mistake. This is not a neurological problem.
Well, Bryn insists that this is a dystonia.
Yes, but I'm telling you, and I'm verifying clinical experience, it cannot be a dystonia. A dystonia means you cannot change the voice no matter what you do. I can change the voice 90% of the cases when they first arrive in the office. There's no problem because if it is a dystonia, which means it's a neurological problem, you cannot change the voice. Therefore, I can report ongoing cures because spasmodic dysphonia is not a neurological problem. It's not a disease. It's not a medical problem. Well, there's something else that I did. I'm going to go back to explain. In 1980, I reported on a number of cures on spasmodic dysphonia. I believe I reported on in the International Association of Logopedics and Phoniatry, Voice and Speech.
That's a peer-reviewed, prestigious journal, isn't it?
International journal. And I explained that I have these cures and cited the cases. Jane Brody knows about that, ignored it. The New York Times, from up, above, down, has ignored a peer-reviewed International Association of Logopedic Review. They have ignored the names of the doctors I report on from the Mayo, from UCLA, from Cedars-Sinai, from Scripps, and so forth, and the patients who they can contact who have been cured of spasmodic dysphonia. Why are they doing this?
Well, here's the puzzling scenario that you have working, because I think what you've got is you have really an overarching, really mega and a meta paradigm. It's called the medical paradigm. And you don't fit in the medical paradigm because what you're really doing is really trying to help relearn and condition somebody, change their voice through behavior modification, a specialized form of voice behavior modification. You're not really applying any injections to people. As a matter of fact, you don't really even believe that psychotherapy works.
No, it doesn't. It's never reported
your
a single
colleague,
cure.
Arnie Aronson, a very respected luminary in your field from the Mayo Clinic. I mean, this is a man that spent his time at Rochester, Minnesota, working on this for an entire career. He says that the treatment that you engage in is one of a psychotherapeutic treatment.
Well, I don't do psychotherapy.
So what is he talking about when he refers to what you do as a psychotherapeutic treatment?
He's trying to excuse the fact.
You're getting results, right?
Yes, he's trying to excuse the fact and cover up the fact that the cases that I'm seeing are diagnosed as neurological at the top medical centers in the country by the best and the brightest, and that I cannot and I do not treat psychotherapeutically. That is not my area. I do treat it by behavior modification, which is my area, and that if it were neurological, I couldn't cure it. But he's saying that the cases I'm treating to a cure are not neurological. Nonsense. They've been diagnosed as neurological.
Aronson is assuming, because you're getting results in a condition that is regarded by his field and the medical profession at large as incurable. He's assuming that it must have been a faulty diagnosis. But when you've drawn to his attention, you had a conversation with him recently, and you told him these cases were not misdiagnosed. They were diagnosed by the top otolaryngologists in the country.
But they were diagnosed by Arnie Aronson of the Mayo Clinic with Reverend James Johnson as a neurological problem. Dr. James he's a Reverend James Johnson, has been cured of spasmodic dysphonia for about 18 years. Arnie Aronson knows that.
And Aronson diagnosed him as a neurological disorder.
That's correct.
Not as a psychogenic or psychological problem.
What's interesting about the whole thing...
But since you get the results, then all of a sudden he attributes a psychological diagnosis to when Cooper gets results.
Yeah, or the medical profession says, when I get results with their spasmodic dysphonic cases that they have failed with, whether it's Botox or surgery, that it wasn't spasmodic dysphonia. Then that could be a case for malpractice if they're saying, I didn't treat the
isn't that a tautology?
cases. What's that?
They've put you into a tautology?
Yes.
No, I mean, it's like a circular reasoning.
Yeah.
Well, if you get results, that means that it was not spasmodic dysphonia. But if they don't get results, that means it is spasmodic dysphonia. It's like a loop. But Aronson has to agree that you are, for whatever the cases are, getting results.
But he did. I spoke with him the other day.
He did acknowledge that.
He acknowledges I have cures of spasmodic dysphonia. The issue is the cover-up of the New York Times at the highest level on the way down. And I wrote recently to Bill Keller, the new editor of the New York Times. I got no response. I've written to Dan Okrent, who is being replaced by another person who was the ombudsman for the New York Times. There is no interest in investigating or discussing cures of spasmodic dysphonia by one lone doctor in the world that has on his website the fact that SD, spasmodic dysphonia, is curable and that Botox may be the treatment of choice today, but tomorrow it may be another story. Thank you very much for joining with me, Dr. John Curtis. Bye-bye.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you get results, Aronson finds it psychogenic. When they don't get any results, then he finds it legitimate,
Aronson is one part of the issue. The New York Times is the key, because if they were to accept the fact that there are cures, then the medical profession would be forced to review itself and reconsider. At the present point, because the medical profession is totally opposed to cures, they are totally opposed to cures, despite the fact they know of my cures. So what has happened is patients who have the strangle voice are not ready to believe or have credibility in what I'm doing. There are cures of spasmodic dysphonia.